Edgar, Mama, love you. And can you close this door? Thank you, darling.
Good morning.
Ah, there we are. Yeah, sorry about that. We were at Edgar's school to get feedback from the teachers, and it took quite a bit longer than normal. So,
Priority.
for my tardiness.
And mine too, or my expected tardiness.
Your expected tardiness. There we go. How are you?
I'm fine. Yourself? Today is a very important day, unfortunately,
Yes.
in the U.S.
Well, for the whole world.
Yeah, election day. And the expectations are very negative, unfortunately, which means democracy is on the way downhill. So quite tragic.
Yeah, it is, especially with Elon Musk, with his new role. He actually tweeted today or yesterday that people should vote Republican, even though he's voted Democrat most of his life, because that means there will be a balance between Democrats and Republicans. So he's using the biggest social media platform in the world to tell people to vote for gridlock. How is that? How can he use his influence like that? It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, I agree. I actually disappointed because I had thought he was a very decisive, focused individual. And it turns out that the Twitter thing, I think, is going to be a financial disaster for him. But I'm not a Twitter user, so I do know anytime anybody has 88 million followers, that's a position of influence, needless to say.
Yeah. I am a Twitter user, but today I set up a Mastodon server for the future text community, so we can use that and be independent.
What is a Mastodon server? I mean,
it's the same as Twitter, supposedly, but it's on individual servers. So it works on the principle of email, where anybody who has email can communicate with anyone else who has email, and you can go from provider to provider. So I installed it on my server, which was actually quite difficult, which is interesting. But then again, how many people have their own email servers? So it's kind of the same
Yeah.
level. So people can join a community like they can join an email account, but they're free to move. So if the community of the future of text goes on this server and after a while they don't want to be with me anymore, it's not a problem. Just like changing email provider, you still keep your ID and your name and everything.
Good. Fascinating. I have little to talk about specifically. Only two things come to mind. One is the remarkable, we've exchanged some emails about that. I've made no decision to try it, although that's my next step. And the other issue I simply wanted to communicate to you is that my thinking about text and the importance of formatting for the reader, I've begun to crystallize in the phrase visually self-evident text or major messages. That,
Can
what
you
I'm,
write that down in an email, please? I will put it at the back of the book.
okay.
That's a really good phrase.
Because it's what I learned doing spreadsheets, and I periodically now will really like an article, like I like the book Extended Mind, but find it frustrating because the author has so poorly conveyed her or his message. And for example, Tom Friedman wrote an article the other day that had some real substantive comment about China and how it's changed over 20 years. And I kind of really liked the article as I read it, but I had to search to look for his major conclusions, even though he said that there are 4 major trends. It took me a while to find the 4 trends. And so I took a copy and simply gave a summary sentence in bold for each of his 4 trends. And it was infinitely easier to read because it not just clarified the message, it clarified the structure of the whole document.
So what I take from that is the thing, because you and Bob both have been hammering on this, when it comes to teaching people how to write better, that's out of my remit. It's important, but it's out of my remit. I'm more trying to do the tools and systems. But then we get into the social annotation thing, which I think can be, I haven't been excited by it, but what I really like is DJs. Like when I work, I don't listen to one song or one band anymore. I find something that's an hour or 2 long with a DJ that puts together the kind of music I can deal with when I work. Same with this. I would subscribe to your highlights, specifically yours, Jim. So for instance, okay, Peter is the worst, and this is said lovingly and respectfully. I'm aware that we're recording the conversation. Peter will give a link in our discussions in text, in the text chat, without saying why. He's getting better now, but it's because he's a very generous person. He wants to share the information.
Yeah.
And as you say, most articles there's a lot of waffle, and they're all columns of gray, absolutely. But let me just show you something here, because so you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
So here's the state of our book so far. And before I'm going to show you what I mean, I just want to, okay, so it's parsed. So I've implemented the thing we discussed before, doing normal arrow keys, right, left to navigate, and then arrow down to go through.
Yeah.
It works now. It's implemented.
Good.
So it allows you to go through. And here, Barbara's piece, there's a lot here, but I mean, for instance, okay, I can't remember what it is now. Highlight, yeah, Command Shift H, sorry, there's a reason. If I could get a document from you with even basic yellow highlights, that would be really, really useful. So how can we build a workflow where if someone shares a PDF or maybe even a web page, it is shared with a highlight.
So you're saying by definition, the highlight is what the author thinks is important.
No.
How does that differ from the bold?
No. You, my friend, the reader. So here I am on a random, it's about a review of a camera, but let's say that okay, so it's got a tiny bit of text, but for the sake of argument, I want to share this with you, but this is the key bit I want to share. I should be able to, on the web page, highlight that and share it with you, rather than just the link, right? Because when people share things on Twitter, what do? Bit of text and then maybe a link. You don't know the bits in what they're sharing.
Yeah.
So I think you're on something really, really important. Let me see. It's like, I don't even know. Can you highlight here normally? I can't see why, because it would go away immediately. So without a plugin, can't really be done. But because the thing that I think really needs to happen is for citations to be able to open up the document that's being cited instantly. I think that's really important. You shouldn't have to go to the download page. So we need new ways to distribute. Now, so the Mastodon server, here it is with a silly icon. I am just playing around. It took my service providers a week to set it up because it's not easy. But what I would like to do, we have here our drafts of the book that I keep sharing with people to get feedback. I don't want to put that in Dropbox. It would be better if it was here, right? And if there was a way where in Reader, for instance, I could do upload to Mastodon or whatever, or share, and if you could have a way where you could instantly get it, because the thing you're talking about of being able to highlight is so important.
You know, just as a reaction, seeing something by Barbara Tversky, who I've not met, but I respect because of her book and her ideas. I just, I want to kind of read it because it's got the highlights, which means I can get the essence of what she's saying in a minute or so. And if I want to read the whole thing, then I can do that too. But I'm not obligated to read the whole thing to get the main message.
Yeah. No, we agree so much. I mean, when I started liquid.info way back in the 90s, one of the terms I used was glanceable information. And
I was about to say that the second three words after visually self-evident, ... were at a glance.
Oh, yeah.
So I totally agree.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I did actually search to see if someone else used the word, and they didn't. When I used, there was no mention of it at all on the web. That's a long time ago. But yeah, these are really important concepts. I mean, I developed a thing for the Mac where on your hard drive next to it there was a level, so you could see how full it was. And even just developing that as a concept was interesting, and someone else coded it, but they just took it and asked for permission and coded it, which is lovely. But, very often, is it the gray or the white, or rather the black and white that indicates capacity or free space? So there are all these interesting issues, and that was to indicate just a simple gauge rather than textual information. So there are many, many things that we need to work on for that, for sure.
It's interesting as we talk, and I have been thinking in the back of my mind that your software and my thinking about formatting, which is pretty simplistic, and Remarkable as a useful note-taking device goes back to your comments about glanceability. And it's almost as if Remarkable needs a partnership with Frode's software, which is then expanded so you can do these highlight kinds of things. Because one of my questions about Remarkable is, I think I can download a website to it, and then I can read it later. But I can read it in a medium where I can make notes integral to the text that I can't do on the web directly. So that's getting back toward what you're trying to do.
Yeah. I'm just looking. I'm just on a random web. I'm on BBC website now with just some text. I'm just wondering. Hang on, I'll share screen so it's not too stupid. One thing that could be interesting is, of course, you can export as a PDF, right, from a web page. So I'll do that, and here it is. Obviously, not the best kind of export, but if there was a one-click thing in the browser to export, and then you could just do this, and then share it with someone,
Yeah,
then you could be a real knowledge DJ.
that's an interesting concept.
There is, in this environment, when I now fold, oh, that's interesting. It's not what I expected. Okay, hang on. Oh yeah, right. See this?
Yeah,
It only shows the highlighted sections and headings. You know where they are.
yeah, yeah. Boy, that would be a powerful. I mean, that would be worth starting to use electronic versions of books rather than paper versions. I probably would want to do both, but
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously to get the workflow, but so let's say that for fun, we develop, you use Safari, right? The default Mac browser.
yeah,
Right. We develop a Safari plugin that allows you to highlight and share either via reader or not. But the sharing aspect has to be part of it because, you know, I'm sure we both have friends who will share kind of knowledge things with us, and it's just like, you expect me to read all this? What's the point?
yeah. So the whole knowledge sharing, bits and pieces of knowledge of, so subsets of the chunks. I love the idea of your knowledge DJ. Is that something you heard or you invented? Or both?
I have not heard that, but you know, it's a curator, I guess, would be the more reasonable term.
Except that knowledge DJ has a spontaneity to it that slow motion curator does not have. It's got a sense of activity and spontaneity and almost improv that curatorship does not.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
And it's a new term. Whereas curator is an old-fashioned term. So one views it, I do at least, in terms of an old knowledge context, not a new knowledge, technological context.
I'm just looking to see what's already in the app store, if anything. Teamwork made easy, how? Oh, I guess you share within that kind of close community. I mean, one thing you can do already, yeah, I'm just looking for a light here. So copy as a citation, or actually just copy with link. So if I now make an email, it pastes it with the URL.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea for that is you share the bit that you're interested in.
Yeah.
People know where they can get the rest.
How did you do that? Is that that's just knowing the web well?
No, that is, by the way, this is, if you wanted to copy as a citation, you do it this way. So it gives you all this stuff. No, this is my tool Liquid that you know.
Okay.
So with Liquid, I've currently keyboard shortcut, and then here are the options. The one that I've set to be default is this, the easy ready thing.
Yeah.
But it could be made to be, if I just go in here now, what we can do, a copy with link, we can make that the spacebar. Actually, we'll keep that spacebar and enter. Right, so now, if you select text on whatever page and you do this, oops, and you just hit enter, it does that copying for you.
Okay.
It isn't what we're talking about, but I'm just wondering about mechanisms.
So it's very complex shortcuts.
They're not that complex. You have the shortcut to open it. And now you could just mouse your way down. Or you could learn to, which is copy, because C is already convert.
Yeah.
And L, C, L, that's a bit slow, but that's the reason I have, you could do these extra shortcuts for yourself. For instance, if you open and then you do spacebar, it does the flow, the reading thing. You can do all these combinations. So for instance, now copy with link. All you do is open, enter.
Jesus. So it takes some time to learn the system, but once you learn it, it's many increments of time saved.
Yeah, but you're highlighting it, yeah, I think is more compelling because let's say what happens if I do it here. So that was from a PDF, and so it can't, okay. Let's try to do a copy as citation. It doesn't have, the other one, it can get stuff from the web. Here it has no access. Liquid doesn't understand visual meta, and obviously very few pieces of software has that. When you read stuff like the Friedman article, do you read it on the web or as a PDF or what?
I typically print it out, which is not an ideal situation, but I do that because I'm as interested in the insights that the article triggers as I am in the article itself. So one of the things I wrote for myself was the kind of multiple modes of thought involved when reading an article like the Friedman article. First of all, I'm listening. Second of all, I'm listening to the thoughts it triggers. And I'll probably note those on the side of the article. Mm-hmm. I'll then third, think about what Friedman is saying. And fourth, think about what has been triggered by what he's saying. So it gets kind of multi-layered, if you will, because of the multiple purposes. And even there are priorities. Most of all, I'm interested in what he's saying and learning from what he's saying, listening carefully. But then there are kind of feedback loops that happen and that themselves are kind of fascinating because it's the associations that are triggered that is your unconscious mind working at a very high speed. That fascinate me.
Yeah, interesting. I'm now looking through the extensions for Safari. I cannot see anything like this. So yeah, maybe we should try to realize some of this. Some of this where yeah.
The other phrase that comes to mind is the one that Bob has used on a regular basis and that I've kind of adapted, which is scan, skip, and read selectively. You know, it's the same thing as glanceability. But to get the big picture first, drill down to key sentences, and then kind of follow the feedback loops from there. So that one doesn't have to read an entire article to figure out what it means. You can get a sense of where it's going, you know, very early on.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. Just opening up our book here again. Yeah, it is difficult to make things. A lot of it comes down to the how clear the author is.
Yeah, agreed. But even if the author is maximally clear and organized, there still are layers of major message, support argument, support detail. And it's those layers which a really good author captures and can separate. But it's still worth being able to visually, I would love to be able to visually distinguish those layers, which is why in what I sent you several months ago, you know, I actually ended up with the smallest detail in a double column format, which you said you couldn't do yet in author. But I wanted basically to have maybe 4 levels of detail. And when the print gets really tiny, splitting it into smaller columns makes sense. It's the opposite of the problem that newspapers and Tom Friedman have, where his articles are first presented in these narrow, long columns on multiple pages.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when you and I read them, we're reading them on the web as a separate article, formatted like a PDF.
Yeah.
Let me mention one other thing that I'm doing, which is probably my major project. It's something you might be interested in. I've made very little progress in 10 years, but since the financial crisis in 2008, I started delving into kind of graphic portrayal of problems. And that's partly why I'm so interested in what Bob has done, because he's kind of the ultimate graphic artist in that sense. But I mention it to you because my major project right now is summarizing a whole bunch of ideas about capitalism and democracy. And then getting very idealistic and talking about what specific changes we, the people, American citizens, can make to make a change. My sister, who was a political realist, died 3 years ago. She would always say, "Jim, you're still dreaming." And she was right, and I understood that. But the press, to my knowledge, is not really addressing kind of alternate realities. And so I've decided to just take the time. I have lots of time as an 80-year-old, and am putting ideas on paper, like a proposal that, we should pass it may be impossible to pass these, but I still want to mention them. We, the people, own all federal lands, not the federal government. And we, the people, need to create a long-term citizen investment fund like the Norway Oil Fund, whatever it's called.
The Sovereign Wealth Fund, yeah.
Yes, and like the Alaska Permanent Fund, which probably copied Norway. But the idea that we, the people, own the federal lands means that the stewards we, the people, somehow select would be the ones who negotiated deals with companies about oil rights, so that it would be taken out of the hands of the federal government, which has conflicting objectives. So the idea was to, one, create a sovereign wealth fund for American citizens. Should have done that 50 years ago, but the technology wasn't available. 30 years ago, it was probably available. And it certainly is available now. But other things, obviously, number one in the US would be getting money out of politics. How do you do that? I would argue that one of the amendments should be that corporations are not people. Corporations are not citizens, to overrule the Supreme Court in the US. There's a whole bunch of things where ideas that have been around for a while just make a lot of sense, but they've rarely been collected in one whole thing. So that's part of the reason I'm interested in the whole text thing, because I think the message has to be very short and concise and organized so that people can get the essence of it in a very short period of time. So my major project is basically trying to put into hard text those ideas that I've been assembling over 10 years in a very disorganized way. And I've just decided to do it.
I on the problem side of that, in terms of how to do it, I identify very, very strongly, because things get scattered. How do you connect them? How do you collect
Yeah.
them? I've tried writing books for years, and thank God I decided to get other people to write it. I just write my piece inside it, because it is really hard, and it is, of course, a hypertextual type of question. The way that I'm doing it now is the glossary system in Author and Reader is approaching what you're saying. And of course, a lot of these personal knowledge management systems are also approaching the whole thing. But what the personal knowledge systems seem to lack is the ability to make a coherent presentation for someone other than yourself, which is what you are doing.
Trying to do.
Yeah. So I think it would be good if you return to the community. Obviously now it's very specific what we're talking about, so no rush. But we currently have the issue of our book as, how we're going to present that, and some of it's in VR, and it's been very stressful arguing. I mean, yesterday I had a huge argument with Bob because, I tried to just briefly show the whole arrow key thing. And, I'm not interested in blah, 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 and all of that. And then I said, okay, Bob, where do you actually read our PDFs? Well, you gave a link, all of that stuff. So it turns out he reads in the browser. So I was like, okay, well, then you don't have access to these things, and that is fine. But, please don't complain about not having that functionality. You can't have it in the browser. But then, Bob is a very passionate guy, so he did really listen. And I then said, can I show you what I'm talking about? And so he looked at what we're doing and he said, that looks very reasonable. And, that was that. But Mark Anderson has made the point that our book doesn't necessarily fit a lot of the knowledge ideas we have because it's such a disparate set of articles. But what you're talking about is a case study in this context for getting a coherent, networked set of knowledge presented to the world. So it may very well be a case study for us.
I have no idea what I'm going to do with it and how I'm going to do, quote, distribute or try to distribute it. But I'm willing to try and take that risk. It just seems to me that there are too many good ideas that a lot of people would appreciate, whatever their political inclination is.
Yeah, I can see that because it's one topic. I can imagine something like, when I invite someone to write for the future of text, I'm very wary of giving them any direction because that's something else. But in your case, you can basically, I'm being super simple now, but something like let's say you have a three-dimensional model that you create in the beginning, and you have one here, democracy good, capitalism bad. That's one thing. And then over here, you have the opposite. And then you have other things that you have predetermined saying, these are aspects of this. Of course, it's much more complicated than any of those things. But you tell contributors, if you want contributors, including your own contributions, they have to point to somewhere on that shape. You can't just write wishy-washy stuff. You have to choose a position first. If that changes, fine. If there's more than one, fine, but because you're doing something specific and something specifically important because, well, it is crucially important because, climate change is our number one issue, but you can't deal with climate change if you don't have democracy or a functioning capitalist system.
Or a functioning Congress. Congress is dysfunctional and it's politically controlled by business who is opposed to environmental change.
Yeah.
So.
No, yeah, exactly. So it's very, very interesting, the different kind of thing. I mean, one thing that I keep hearing a lot is this thing, because right now with the energy bills going up, and many on the right wing of the spectrum say that these giant companies should be able to make this amount of money because they need the investment in order to go green if that's what we want. And, I'm not a capitalist in the active sense, but my father was. He was an entrepreneur, built his companies, and he drilled into me this very simple thing. Companies don't spend any money if they don't have to.
Agreed.
And that's it. So if you make a huge profit, what do? You take the money and you buy another company, or you invest it, or you buy an airplane, or you buy a nice dinner. But no one's just automatically pays their employees more, unless there's a reason for it. That is not what a company does. A company will invest if it is an opportunity for them to grow, not because they happen to have money sitting around.
I would take a slightly different view of that. I think economics and governments don't differentiate enough between long-term and short-term.
That is also very true.
One of the criticisms of capitalism is that it's only short term. If you are a benevolent employer, owner, like the benevolent dictator model,
yeah,
you are truly concerned about the long-term health of your employees and their long-term economic security. So you would be willing to pay them more or indirectly via some ownership in the corporation, the small corporation that with enough enthusiasm could get larger. There's a grocery store in Boston that Market Basket. There's a whole book written about it with the owner who was a beneficial employee. I mean, he thought that way about his employers. And it's a magnificent book because he had relatives who were smaller owners who fought him saying, we need to sell this company to Wall Street for short-term profit. Anyway, I need not go into that for any length, but it's a very interesting discussion relative to economics.
It is an interesting discussion, but what my father said to me is that the job of the company is to make money. That is its primary reason. You know, if you want to do charity, you may choose to do that either for PR reasons or because you think it's important, but that isn't the function of a company. And also, capitalism is called capitalism because it is about the primacy of capital. You know, if a company makes money, those who own the company have that extra money and they will then invest it to make more capital. You know, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But the message from my father, who was certainly not a bad man in the capitalist sense at all, you know, he never fired anyone in his life, and at one point he had 5,000 people working for him. Is the government's job is to look out for us, you know, laws and regulation. I'm not saying my father was right, but I'm saying that he was a successful capitalist. I mean, the house I'm sitting in, he paid for it. I didn't pay for it. You know, so his success is self-evident. And even though he was a kind man and good man, he made it very clear that, okay, he happened to have certain morals, but the company doesn't need to have that. It's not its business. And this is why we need, you know, and also, and I'm sure we're talking this, you and I agree, we're talking about slightly different ways of framing things, but also.
Exactly.
Yeah, but also the whole notion of a free market. One thing I hate about the idiot American, which is not you, but is the one that throws the word freedom around without any concept of what it means, right? I mean, for two
Or
reasons.
a very narrow concept of what it means.
I would say zero concept almost, because first of all, they don't seem to understand that the word liberty means freedom. A liberal is for freedom. They don't seem to like that. And, you know, they don't want censorship, but they don't want wokeness. So they're censoring wokeness. I mean, these are such clear contradiction. But the thing that really bothers me is, you know, like gun culture. You know, I like shooting. I went shooting in Estonia this summer. But, you know, I don't think anybody should have weapons lying around. They're very different things. So I would say it is important to have the freedom from guns, to not live in a society with guns. So there's freedom from, as well as freedom for, right? But until we have that dialogue, what do you mean by freedom? You know, it's really hard to get through somewhere.
That's a very good way to frame the gun issue. I had not thought of that freedom from guns as well as freedom to or for guns. I made a note to send you the first page of my thoughts about capitalism, because it basically says, I believe deeply in capitalism, but in decentralized entrepreneurial capitalism, not giant corporate capitalism.
Ah, that's the thing about the free market. Thank you. And exactly that point. A free market, if left without regulation, totally free, will end up being monopolies in a relatively short period of time.
One of the detailed statements is true free market capitalism, not false free market capitalism. So I totally agree.
Yeah, it's also a question again of what we mean by freedom in that sense. You know, is it freedom to pollute? Is it freedom to make money? Is it freedom to not pay taxes? What are the freedoms of the free market we value?
This is hard to see, but let me show you the first. Oh, it's reversed. The Libertarian Party, who talks freedom, freedom, freedom in a very narrow way, had a diagram, a two-dimensional diagram, which on one side had conservatives, on the other had liberal, on the bottom it had government, and the top it had libertarian. I added corporate big business or corporate power, and I added pro-citizen to make it a cube. And it turns out that if you can hardly see it because there's a sphere inside 6 prisms. And in effect, it's a lot like this. So the surfaces of this cube are really the edges of the prism. And in the middle is a sphere, is a big problem. I think of it as a major societal problem. Could be global warming, should be in a sense, could be capitalism, could be the inequity of wealth and income in an economic system. And then, in my mind, inside that sphere is a lot of subspheres that talk about the components of the problem. And so this is kind of an integral part of what I've been thinking. Because the idea, if you can come up with a graphic description of a major societal problem, it's only an imperfect beginning of a mental model. And in a discussion group of 5 or 10 or 20 or 100 people, you can then try to refine that mental model in a multi-stage process where stage 1 is criticizing the mental model that somebody else has come up with, so that you brainstorm and expand the mental model. And then phase 2 would be to evaluate the new mental model in terms of what's important. What's the most important issue, the second most? So you again prioritize the component issues. Because what I learned in trying to visualize a problem from inside this 6 pyramid scheme was that some of the sub-issues you see from this side, you can't see from that side because they're blocked graphically. So that's a way of thinking about emphasis. And so this is an idea that I want to kind of further develop, but I haven't yet figured out how to do it. And I'm thinking that I need to start doing digital graphics to really get at the essence of what I'm trying.
Yeah, I think I agree with you very much. But there is another issue, and that is the different emotional characteristics of people in different political leanings. I've tried a few ways of finding out ways to map each other, generally speaking, right and left. And it's been really, really difficult because it comes down to the emotions. And I've done some research, and it turns out that people who are conservative are generally more afraid and more emotional. They are more afraid of physical violence, which is maybe why they want all the guns and they're scared of other people, which is kind of interesting because they are the ones complaining about bleeding heart liberals and saying people are woke and emotional. So I'm not saying this as a sudden rant to the right. It is more, in order to see the other side of a political argument, you got to go back to someone's values. And one thing here in the UK, we're also having big problems in many areas right now, is, for instance, free school meals. Why in the world should a child ever have to pay for a school meal? Right? The stigma that goes with this free school meal is massive. Right? What in the world does it not gain society that all children go well fed to school? There's absolutely no downside. I mean, right now, rightfully, we're sending a lot of arms to Ukraine because we have to, so our societies have the ability to fund giant projects when there is a need. What could be more important than a child's, forget education, because people on the right think that universities are liberal, machines, but just the basics. If we can't even agree on things like that, like, you know better than me what the gun culture is. Emily's best friend now lives in Texas. They have her children, a little bit older than Edgar, have regular live fire shooter action type things in school where they have to hide under desks and stuff. How in the world does that serve anybody? But if you don't agree on the basic morality of that, how to go through the problem just doesn't happen. It's really, and reading, obviously I'm a massive fan of Hamilton, the musical, but even reading Hamilton, the true biography, the issues they had back in the day, I mean, protesters, this is what I read yesterday, were surrounding George Washington's house, demanding that we go to war with the British again, just a little bit after the war was won. There's always been such huge, like you have in America, the difference between federal and states, that tension. We had
Yeah.
Brexit here, so obviously we screwed up, but wow, we got to get to the morality of it. And you'd think that maybe Christianity could help, but quite clearly not.
It's going the opposite way.
Yeah. That's crazy.
When you talk about schools, is your context or reference point Norway or Great Britain?
Oh, I was talking about Great Britain in that context. Oh,
Okay.
Dennis ready. I have to go in a minute.
Okay.
I mean, in Norway, it's all immigration is. I'm so proud of Norway. There are places where small villages now is just overloaded with, by numbers, overloaded by people born abroad. It's a huge thing. But I mean, I see here like right now, my dinner is cooked by a refugee. She cooks all our meals. It's fantastic. We have a family of fantastic people, have the right kind of temperament. And I joke because my brother-in-law is Spanish. Imagine if we had Spanish people living in the house, we wouldn't survive. Jokingly saying that they would probably be a bit louder and other things. Integrating with other people, unless both sides make a huge effort, is very difficult and very expensive. I didn't realize the expenses of this kind of stuff. Now, we don't have much in our household, but if any issues came up, like trying to find a new house for these people because they can't live with us forever, unfortunately, because they need to own where they live to some degree. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And
it's getting harder given economics kind of skyrocketing, the cost of living.
Yeah, it's tough on so many levels. But I mean, yesterday, Emily and I, we have this thing where in the evening we watch TV together, a show or two. That's kind of our special time. We don't talk, we just watch, sit next to each other and watch. But there was a piece from CNN on YouTube. We'd go to YouTube for light comedy, but there was an update from Ukraine. I'll maybe send you the link, but there was, it said, viewer discretion advice type of thing in the beginning. It was like soldiers going out to search for missing servicemen. And they found them dead. But what we actually saw, never seen anything like it. One of them, he was still in uniform, but mostly decomposed, just moving the body about, just this rattling bag of bones. Like, how can people deal with this? And then another one, just have to tell you, it was literally just a skeleton left. And these people have to, bag and tag them and all of that stuff. But to see it, it looked like a steak dinner. It looked like the remains of what we eat. That was a human being.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like a scary Halloween skeleton, obviously, but like the bones pieces had to be moved. Oh, they found a ring. Can help identify him. It's so absolutely so horrific. So much of what is happening that the only thing I think that can save us is religion. A new one, obviously, the way things are going, because it has to hit an emotional note. Logic, forget about it. Politics, forget about it. If we don't have a shared humanity, that some things just aren't right. Did I tell you that I've actually founded a religion?
No,
I'm not kidding. It's a real thing.
I'm not surprised by the creativity.
That's kind of you to say, but it is a real thing. I have done it. I haven't registered it because you can't do it as easily as in America, but I'll tell you everything you need to know about the religion in 30 seconds before I have to go dinner. It's very simple. You take the first testament, the Jewish Bible, and then you take the New Testament, the Christian Bible, and then you take the Quran and you take some glue and you glue them into one volume. And at the end, you add a post-it note that has 2 sentences. Do good, That's the first sentence. Second sentence is in dialogue with others. That's it. You know, we gotta find something. I mean, like right now in this country, you know, we lost our queen and now we have a king. A lot of people are saying it's old fashioned and he's way too rich and all that stuff. I mean, first of all, they don't really enjoy the riches. They work hard. It's not like they sit and eat, you know, lobster every day. But just the idea of having someone trying to show a noble life like our queen did, most people agree with her. It's important, you know. And are you familiar with Karen Armstrong?
The name is familiar, but for some reason, no.
Okay, does Kepler's bookstore still exist?
Yep. It's a special place, though it's declined, unfortunately.
When you have an opportunity, go to Kepler's and buy any book by Karen Armstrong, and I'll buy you coffee in return at some point.
When was the last time you were there?
3, 4 years ago, but I am excited to go back at some point.
Oh, I look forward to that. So you saw it when it was in its new location in central Menlo Park.
No, I didn't. So I must have been longer then.
Because it has had 4 different locations. Actually, I'm sorry, 3 locations. You know, it was a kind of counterculture bookstore when we arrived in California in
Yes.
1973. But it has evolved and become very successful, and then it declined with lots of other bookstores. But it was saved by a group of venture capitalists.
Okay.
Because they infused it and made it, I think, a nonprofit. Anyway, long story we can continue with, but it's now adjacent to immediately adjacent to the center of Menlo Park, which is a cafe, European style cafe called Cafe Barone, with a plaza along El Camino Real.
I look forward to hopefully you taking me.
Anyway,
that sounds
dinner
lovely.
time.
Yeah,
I'm enjoying our brainstorming.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it very much. Let's talk again soon, and this may be a good time for you to come in a little bit to the other chats. But let's catch up soon. Have a
Okay,
good day.
take care. Thank you.
All right, bye.